Phoenician, as justice required, after the name of those who were the first to introduce them into Greece. Paper rolls also were called, from of old, parchments by the Ionians, because formerly, when paper was scarce, they used instead the skins of sheep and goats, on which material many of the barbarians are even now wont to write. I myself saw Cadmean characters engraved upon some tripods in the temple of Apollo Ismenias in Boeotian Thebes, most of them shaped like the Ionian. One of the tripods has the inscription following, "Me did Amphitryon place, from the far Teleboans coming." This would be about the age of Laius, the son of Labdacus, the son of Polydorus, the son of Cadmus. Another of the tripods has this legend in the hexameter measure, "I to far-shooting Phoebus was offered by Scius the boxer, when he had won at the games a wondrous beautiful offering." This might be Scius, the son of Hippocoon, and the tripod, if dedicated by him and not by another of the same name, would belong to the time of Oedipus, the son of Laius. The third tripod has also an inscription in hexameters which runs thus, "King Laodamas gave this tripod to far-seeing Phoebus when he was set on the throne, a wondrous beautiful offering." It was in the reign of this Laodamas, the son of Eteocles, that the Cadmeans were driven by the Argives out of their country and found a shelter with the Encheleans. The Gephyrians at that time remained in the country, but afterwards they retired before the Boeotians and took refuge at Athens, where they have a number of temples for their separate use, which the other Athenians aren't allowed to enter. Among the rest, one of Achaean Demeter, in whose honour they likewise celebrate special orgies. Having thus related the dream which Hipparchus saw, and traced the descent of the Gephyrians, the family whereto his murderers belonged, I must proceed with the matter whereof I was intending before to speak, to wit, the way in which the Athenians got quit of their tyrants. Upon the death of Hipparchus, Hippias, who was king, grew harsh towards the Athenians, and the Alcmeonidae, an Athenian family which had been banished by the Pisistratidae, joined the other exiles and endeavoured to procure their own return and to free Athens by force. They seized and fortified Lipsydrium above Paeonia and tried to gain their object by arms. But great disasters befell them, and their purpose remained unaccomplished. They therefore resolved to shrink from no contrivance that might bring them success, and accordingly they contracted with the Amphictyons to build the temple which now stands at Delphi, but which in those days did not exist. Having done this, they proceeded, being men of great wealth and members of an ancient and distinguished family, to build the temple much more magnificently than the plan obliged to them. Besides other improvements, instead of the coarse stone whereof by the contract the temple was to have been constructed, they made the facings of Parian marble. These same men, if we may believe the Athenians, during their stay at Delphi, persuaded the Pythoness by a bribe to tell the Spartans, whenever any of them came to consult the oracle, either on their own private affairs or on the business of the state, that they must free Athens. So the Lacedaemonians, when they found no answer ever returned to them but this, sent at last Anchimelius, the son of Aster, a man of note among their citizens, at the head of an army against Athens, with orders to drive out the Pisistratidae, albeit they were bound to them by the closest ties of friendship, for they esteemed the things of heaven more highly than the things of men. The troops went by sea and were conveyed in transports. Anchimolius brought them to an anchorage at Phalerum, and there the men disembarked. But the Pisistratidae, who had previous knowledge of their intentions, had sent to Thessaly, between which country and Athens there was an alliance, with a request for aid. The Thessalians, in reply to their entreaties, sent them by a public vote 1,000 horsemen, under the command of their king, Cineas, who was a Conniaean. When this help came, the Pisistratidae laid their plan accordingly. They cleared the whole plain about Phalerum so as to make it fit for the movements of cavalry, and then charged the enemy's camp with their horse, which fell with such fury upon the Lacedaemonians as to kill numbers, among the rest Anchimolius the general, and to drive the remainder to their ships. Such was the fate of the first armies sent from Lacedaemon, and the tomb of Anchimolius may be seen to this day in Attica. It's at Alopicae, Foxtown, near the temple of Heracles in Kinossargus. Afterwards, the Lacedaemonians dispatched a larger force against Athens, which they put under the command of Cleomenes, son of Anaxandridas, one of their kings. These troops were not sent by sea, but marched by the mainland. When they were coming to Attica, their first encounter was with the Thessalian horse, which they shortly put to flight, killing above 40 men. The remainder made good their escape and fled straight to Thessaly. Cleomenes proceeded to the city, and with the aid of such of the Athenians as wished for freedom, besieged the tyrants who had shut themselves up in the Pelasgic fortress. And now there had been small chance of the Pisistratidæ falling into the hands of the Spartans, who didn't even design to sit down before the place, which had moreover been well provisioned beforehand with stores both of meat and drink. Nay, it's likely that after a few days' blockade the Lacedaemonians would have quitted Attica altogether and gone back to Sparta, had not an event occurred most unlucky for the besieged and most advantageous for the besiegers. The children of the Pisistratidæ were made prisoners as they were being removed out of the country. By this calamity all their plans were deranged, and as the ransom of their children they consented to the demands of the Athenians and agreed within 5 days' time to quit Attica. Accordingly, they soon afterwards left the country and withdrew to Sigeum on the Scamander, after reigning 36 years over the Athenians. By descent they were Pylians of the family of the Nereids, to which Codrus and Melanthus likewise belonged, men who in former times from foreign settlers became kings of Athens. And hence it was that Hippocrates came to think of calling his son Pisistratus. He named him after the Pisistratus who was a son of Nestor. Such then was the mode in which the Athenians got quit of their tyrants. What they did and suffered worthy of note from the time when they gained their freedom until the revolt of Ionia from King Darius, and to the coming of Aristagoras to Athens, with a request that the Athenians would lend the Ionians aid, I shall now proceed to relate. The power of Athens had been great before, but now that the tyrants were gone, it became greater than ever. The chief authority was lodged with 2 persons, Cleisthenes of the family of the Alcmaeonids, who is said to have been the persuader of the Pythoness, and Isagoras, the son of Tisander, who belonged to a noble house, but whose pedigree I am not able to trace further, howbeit his kinsmen offer sacrifice to the Carian Zeus. These 2 men strove together for the mastery, and Cleisthenes, finding himself the weaker, called to his aid the common people. Hereupon, instead of the 4 tribes among which the Athenians had been divided hitherto, Cleisthenes made 10 tribes, and parcelled out the Athenians among them. He likewise changed the names of the tribes, for whereas they had till now been called after Gelion, Aigecares, Argades, and Hoples, the 4 sons of Ion, Cleisthenes set these names aside and called his tribes after certain other heroes, all of whom were native, except Ajax. Ajax was associated because, although a foreigner, he was a neighbour and an ally of Athens. My belief is that in acting thus, he did but imitate his maternal grandfather, Cleisthenes, king of Sicyon. This king, when he was at war with Argos, put an end to the contests of the rhapsodists at Sicyon, because in the Homeric hymns, Argos and the Argives were so constantly the theme of song. He likewise conceived the wish to drive Adrastus, the son of Teleus, out of his country, seeing that he was an Argive hero. For Adrastus had a shrine at Sicyon, which yet stands in the marketplace of the town. Cleisthenes therefore went to Delphi and asked the oracle if he might expel Adrastus. To this the Pythoness is reported to have answered, "Adrastus is the Sicyonians' king, but thou art only a robber." So when the god wouldn't grant his request, he went home and began to think how he might contrive to make Adrastus withdraw of his own accord. After a while he hit upon a plan which he thought would succeed. He sent envoys to Thebes in Boeotia and informed the Thebans that he wished to bring Melanippus, the son of Astacus, to Sicyon. The Thebans consenting, Cleisthenes carried Melanippus back with him, assigned him a precinct within the government house, and built him a shrine there in the safest and strongest part. The reason for his so doing, which I mustn't forbear to mention, was because Melanippus was Adrastus's great enemy, having slain both his brother Megistes and his son-in-law Tydeus. Cleisthenes, after assigning the precinct to Melanippus, took away from Adrastus the sacrifices and festivals wherewith he had till then been honoured, and transferred them to his adversary. Hitherto the Sicyonians had paid extraordinary honours to Adrastus because the country had belonged to Polybus, and Adrastus was Polybus's daughter's son, whence it came to pass that Polybus, dying childless, left Adrastus his kingdom. Besides other ceremonies, it had been their wont to honour Adrastus with tragic choruses, which they assigned to him rather than Dionysus on account of his calamities. Cleisthenes now gave the choruses to Dionysus, transferring to Melanippus the rest of the sacred rites. Such were his doings in the matter of Adrastus. With respect to the Dorian tribes, not choosing the Sicyonians to have the same tribes as the Argives, he changed all the old names for new ones. And here he took special occasion to mock the Sicyonians, for he drew his new names from the words pig and ass, adding thereto the usual tribe endings. Only in the case of his own tribe he did nothing of the sort, but gave them a name drawn from his own kingly office, for he called his own tribe the Archelae, or rulers, while the others he named Hiatai, or pig folk, Oniatai, or ass folk, and Coriatai, or swine folk. The Sicyonians kept these names not only during the reign of Cleisthenes, but even after his death, by the space of 60 years. Then, however, they took counsel together and changed to the well-known names of Helians, Pamphylians, and Dimanotai, taking at the same time as a fourth name the title Argialeans, from Argialeus, the son of Adrastus. Thus had Cleisthenes the Sicyonian done. The Athenian Cleisthenes, who was grandson by the mother's side of the other and had been named after him, resolved, from contempt, as I believe, of the Ionians, that his tribes should not be the same as theirs, and so followed the pattern set him by his namesake of Sicyon. Having brought entirely over to his own side the common people of Athens, whom he had before disdained, he gave all the tribes new names, and made the number greater than formerly. Instead of the 4 phylarchs, he established 10. He likewise placed 10 demes in each of the tribes, and he was, now that the common people took his part, very much more powerful than his adversaries. Isagoras, in his turn, lost ground, and therefore, to counterplot his enemy, he called in Cleomenes the Lacedaemonian, who had already, at the time when he was besieging the Pisistratidae, made a contract of friendship with him. A charge is even brought against Cleomenes that he was on terms of too great familiarity with Isagoras' wife. At this time, the first thing that he did was to send a herald and require that Cleisthenes and a large number of Athenians besides, whom he called the accursed, should leave Athens. This message he sent at the suggestion of Isagoras, for in the affair referred to, the blood guiltiness lay on the Alcmaeonidae and their partisans, while he and his friends were quite clear of it. The way in which the accursed at Athens got their name was the following. There was a certain Athenian called Chilon, a victor at the Olympic Games, who aspired to the sovereignty, and, aided by a number of his companions who were of the same age with himself, made an attempt to seize the citadel. But the attack failed, and Chilon became a suppliant at the image. Hereupon the heads of the Naucrares, who at that time bore rule in Athens, induced the fugitives to remove by a promise to spare their lives. Nevertheless they were all slain, and the blame was laid on the Alcmaeonidae. All this happened before the time of Pisistratus. When the message of Cleomenes arrived, requiring Cleisthenes and the accursed to quit the city, Cleisthenes departed of his own accord. Cleomenes, however, notwithstanding his departure, came to Athens with a small band of followers, and on his arrival sent into banishment 700 Athenian families, which were pointed out to him by Isagoras. Succeeding here, he next endeavoured to dissolve the council, and to put the government into the hands of 300 of the partisans of that leader. But the council resisted and refused to obey his orders, whereupon Cleomenes, Isagoras, and their followers took possession of the citadel. Here they were attacked by the rest of the Athenians, who took the side of the council, and were besieged for the space of 2 days. On the 3rd day they accepted terms, being allowed, at least such of them as were Lacedaemonians, to quit the country. And so the word which came to Cleomenes received its fulfilment. For when he first went up into the citadel, meaning to seize it, just as he was entering the sanctuary of the goddess in order to question her, the priestess arose from her throne before he had passed the doors, and said, "Stranger from Lacedaemon, depart hence, and presume not to enter the holy place. It is not lawful for a Dorian to set foot there." But he answered, "O woman, I am not a Dorian, but an Achaean." Slighting this warning, Cleomenes made his attempt, and so he was forced to retire, together with his Lacedaemonians. The rest were cast into prison by the Athenians and condemned to die, among them Timasitheus the Delphian, of whose prowess and courage I have great things which I could tell. So these men died in prison. The Athenians directly afterwards recalled Cleisthenes and the 700 families which Cleomenes had driven out. And further they sent envoys to Sardis to make an alliance with the Persians, for they knew that war would follow with Cleomenes and the Lacedaemonians. When the ambassadors reached Sardis and delivered their message, Artaphernes, son of Hystaspes, who was at that time governor of the place, inquired of them who they were, and in what part of the world they dwelt, that they wanted to become allies of the Persians. The messengers told him, upon which he answered them shortly, that if the Athenians chose to give earth and water to King Darius, he would conclude an alliance with them, but if not, they might go home again. After consulting together, the envoys, anxious to form the alliance, accepted the terms, but on their way to Athens they fell into deep disgrace on account of their compliance. Meanwhile, Cleomenes, who considered himself to have been insulted by the Athenians both in word and deed, was drawing a force together from all parts of the Peloponnese, without informing anyone of his object, which was to revenge himself on the Athenians, and to establish Isagoras, who had escaped with him from the citadel, as despot of Athens. Accordingly, with a large army, he invaded the district of Eleusis, while the Boeotians, who had concerted measures with him, took Oinoe and Hysiae, 2 country towns upon the frontier, and at the same time the Chalcidians, on another side, plundered divers places in Attica. The Athenians, notwithstanding that danger, threatened them from every quarter, put off all thought of the Boeotians and the Chalcidians till a future time, and marched against the Peloponnesians, who were at Eleusis. As the 2 hosts were about to engage, first of all the Corinthians, bethinking themselves that they were perpetrating a wrong, changed their minds, and drew off from the main army. Then Demaratus, son of Ariston, who was himself king of Sparta and joint leader of the expedition, and who till now had had no sort of quarrel with Cleomenes, followed their example. On account of this rupture between the kings, a law was passed at Sparta, forbidding both monarchs to go out together with the army, as had been the custom hitherto. The law also provided that as one of the kings was to be left behind, one of the Tindaridae should also remain at home, whereas hitherto both had accompanied the expeditions as auxiliaries. So when the rest of the allies saw that the Lacedaemonian kings were not of one mind, and that the Corinthian troops had quitted their post, they likewise drew off and departed. This was the 4th time that the Dorians had invaded Attica. Twice they came as enemies, and twice they came to do good service to the Athenian people. Their first invasion took place at the period when they founded Megara, and is rightly placed in the reign of Codros at Athens. The second and third occasions were when they came from Sparta to drive out the Pisistratidai. The fourth was the present attack, when Cleomenes, at the head of a Peloponnesian army, entered at Eleusis. Thus the Dorians had now 4 times invaded Attica. So, when the Spartan army had broken up from its quarters thus ingloriously, the Athenians, wishing to revenge themselves, marched first against the Chalcidians. The Boeotians, however, advancing to the aid of the latter as far as the Euripus, the Athenians thought it best to attack them first. A battle was fought accordingly, and the Athenians gained a very complete victory, killing a vast number of the enemy and taking 700 of them alive. After this, on the very same day, they crossed into Euboea and engaged the Chalcidians with the like success, whereupon they left 4,000 settlers upon the lands of the Hippopoti, which is the name the Chalcidians give to their rich men. All the Chalcidian prisoners whom they took were put in irons and kept for a long time in close confinement, as likewise were the Boeotians, until the ransom asked for them was paid. And this the Athenians fixed at 2 minutes. The chains wherewith they were fettered the Athenians suspended in their citadel, where they were still to be seen in my day, hanging against the wall, scorched by the Median flames, opposite the chapel which faces the west. The Athenians made an offering of the 10th part of the ransom money, and expended it on the brazen chariot drawn by 4 steeds, which stands on the left hand immediately that one enters the gateway of the citadel. The inscription runs as follows: When Chalcis and Boeotia dared her might, Athens subdued their pride in valorous fight, gave bonds for insults, and the ransom paid from the full tenths these steeds for Pallas made. Thus did the Athenians increase in strength. And it's plain enough, not from this instance only, but from many everywhere, that freedom is an excellent thing, since even the Athenians, who, while they continued under the rule of tyrants, weren't a whit more valiant than any of their neighbours, no sooner shook off the yoke than they became decidedly the first of all. These things show that while undergoing oppression they let themselves be beaten, since then they worked for a master, but so soon as they got their freedom each man was eager to do the best he could for himself. So fared it now with the Athenians. Meanwhile the Thebans, who longed to be revenged on the Athenians, had sent to the oracle and been told by the Pythoness that of their own strength they would be unable to accomplish their wish. They must lay the matter, she said, before the many-voiced, and ask the aid of those nearest to them. The messengers, therefore, on their return, called a meeting, and laid the answer of the oracle before the people, who no sooner heard the advice to ask the aid of those nearest them, than they exclaimed, "What, aren't they who dwell the nearest to us the men of Tanagra, of Coronea, and Thespiae? Yet these men always fight on our side, and have aided us with a good heart all through the war. Of what use is it to ask them?" But maybe this isn't the true meaning of the oracle. As they were thus discoursing one with another, a certain man, informed of the debate, cried out, "Methinks that I understand what course the oracle would recommend to us. Asopus, they say, had 2 daughters, Thebe and Aegina. The god means that as these 2 were sisters, we ought to ask the Aeginetans to lend us aid." As no one was able to hit on any better explanation, the Thebans forthwith sent messengers to Aegina, and according to the advice of the oracle asked their aid as the people nearest to them. In answer to this petition, the Aeginetans said that they would give them the Iacidae for helpers. The Thebans, now relying on the assistance of the Iacidae, ventured to renew the war, but they met with so rough a reception that they resolved to send to the Aeginetans again, returning the Iacidae and beseeching them to send some men instead. The Aeginetans, who were at that time a most flourishing people, elated with their greatness, and at the same time calling to mind their ancient feud with Athens, agreed to lend the Thebans aid and forthwith went to war with the Athenians without even giving them notice by a herald. The attention of these latter being engaged by the struggle with the Boeotians, the Aeginetans in their ships of war made descents upon Attica, plundered Phalerum, and ravaged a vast number of the townships upon the seaboard, whereby the Athenians suffered very grievous damage. The ancient feud between the Aeginetans and Athenians arose out of the following circumstances. Once upon a time, the land of Epidaurus would bear no crops, and the Epidaurians sent to consult the oracle of Delphi concerning their affliction. The answer bade them set up the images of Damia and Auxesia, and promised them better fortune when that should be done. "Shall the images be made of bronze or stone?" the Epidaurians asked. But the Pythoness replied, "Of neither, but let them be made of the garden olive." Then the Epidaurians sent to Athens and asked leave to cut olive wood in Attica, believing the Athenian olives to be the holiest, and according to others, because there were no olives at that time anywhere else in all the world but at Athens. The Athenians answered that they would give them leave, but on condition of their bringing offerings year by year to Athena Polias and to Erechtheus. The Epidaurians agreed, and having obtained what they wanted, made the images of olive wood and set them up in their own country. Henceforth their land bore its crops, and they duly paid the Athenians what had been agreed upon. Anciently, and even down to the time when this took place, the Aeginetans were in all things subject to the Epidaurians, and had to cross over to Epidaurus for the trial of all suits in which they were engaged one with another. After this, however, the Aeginetans built themselves ships, and growing proud, revolted from the Epidaurians. Having thus come to be at enmity with them, the Aeginetans, who were masters of the sea, ravaged Epidaurus and even carried off these very images of Damia and Auxesia, which they set up in their own country, in the interior, at a place called Oia, about 20 furlongs from their city. This done, they fixed a worship for the images, which consisted in part of sacrifices, in part of female satiric choruses, while at the same time they appointed certain men to furnish the choruses, 10 for each goddess. These choruses didn't abuse men, but only the women of the country. Holy orgies of a similar kind were in use also among the Epidaurians, and likewise another sort of holy orgies, whereof it's not lawful to speak. After the robbery of the images, the Epidaurians ceased to make the stipulated payments to the Athenians, wherefore the Athenians sent to Epidaurus to remonstrate. But the Epidaurians proved to them that they weren't guilty of any wrong. While the images continued in their country, they said, they had duly paid the offerings according to the agreement. Now that the images had been taken from them, they were no longer under any obligation to pay. The Athenians should make their demand of the Aeginetans, in whose possession the figures now were. Upon this the Athenians sent to Aegina and demanded the images back. But the Aeginetans answered that the Athenians had nothing whatever to do with them. After this, the Athenians relate that they sent a trireme to Aegina with certain citizens on board, and that these men, who bore commission from the state, landed in Aegina and sought to take the images away, considering them to be their own, inasmuch as they were made of their wood. And first they endeavoured to wrench them from their pedestals, and so carry them off. But failing herein, they in the next place tied ropes to them, and set to work to try if they could haul them down. In the midst of their hauling, suddenly there was a thunderclap, and with the thunderclap an earthquake, and the crew of the trireme were forthwith seized with madness, and like enemies began to kill one another, until at last there was but one left, who returned alone to Phalerum. Such is the account given by the Athenians. The Aeginetans deny that there was only a single vessel. Had there been only one, they say, or no more than a few, they would easily have repulsed the attack, even if they had had no fleet at all. But the Athenians came against them with a large number of ships, wherefore they gave way and didn't hazard a battle. They don't, however, explain clearly whether it was from a conviction of their own inferiority at sea that they yielded, or whether it was for the purpose of doing that which in fact they did. Their account is that the Athenians, disembarking from their ships, when they found that